Okay. As I said, context is everything. And when I reflect on my life and how I got to be how I am, there's two critical things that kind of stand out. The first is that I was the only girl in a group of boys. So my mum had three brothers and three sisters.
Okay.
All of them have children. I was the only girl amongst those kids. And so I grew up with boys and I had to learn how to survive and thrive in that environment. And that little ecosystem, men had a role and women had a role. And I could see that women and men were treated differently. So I'll give you an example. Sunday nights in my house, I would watch my mum with a pile of ironing this high,
Yes.
trying to get through the ironing
Yes.
while she had a full-time job and
Yes.
she still had to do everything at home. And I remember looking at her thinking, I am never going to do that, right? And there are these roles that I feel like as women, particularly of a certain age group, that has been pushed on us
Yes.
or conditioned, in terms of how we think about the world. And I'll give you an example of that. It's called the Cinderella complex.
Right, right.
So there's this narrative or this undercurrent in being a woman, and not all women have that, granted, but and it's starting to filter out, but it is there. Where as a woman, you're conditioned that some knight in a white horse is going to come and save you, right? Somebody's going to come and look after you.
Yes.
And I got to a point in my 40s and I realized nobody's coming. I got to save myself.
Yes.
And the Cinderella complex is based on a book written by a lady called Colette Dowling,
Okay.
where she talks about being a single mom. And she's got three kids. And I think it's written and based on a story, her life story. In the late 70s or early 80s.
Right.
So you can imagine being an entrepreneur and a single mom were two quite novel things in that time.
Yep, yep.
And yet she's hustling. So she's hustling as a freelance writer to make money to support her kids. And she ends up meeting a man and they move to the country. And she finds that in that process, like she's starting to give up her power slowly. So she's starting to stop hustling and she's starting to stop making the money that she needs to be making to be in the equal in the relationship.
Yeah.
And she's trading that for things like, pottering around the house and doing the cooking and the cleaning and the gardening and all of this stuff until her husband or her partner at one point sort of taps her on the shoulder and says, hey, look at the money. Like you're not earning anything.
Yes.
And she realizes that she's been the one to surrender the power. Like nobody has done this to her. What I'm starting to see is whilst we are breaking down that paradigm in society, what's happening is that we're leaving a gap.
Right.
Okay? And in the gap, we're now saying to girls, you can be anything.
Right.
But they don't have a way for drawing their own map about who they want to be. See, as much as you might be critical of the Cinderella complex, it gave us a model for how to be women in the world.
Yeah.
And then we could consciously choose not to follow that model. Right?
Yes.
But now we're opening it up and we're saying you can be anything. And the girls are like, well, what do I want to be? And how do I even get there? And so who am I in the world? And who's the role model for me?
Correct.
And it leaves all these questions, but they don't have the ability necessarily to draw their own map and then to follow their own path as a result of that freedom.